the stuff I try to stay away from is the companies that want to put on either the single family or the multifamily rooftops, the solar, not charge, reduce the power bill perhaps for the tenants, and then have some form of an agreement where they get paid upon sale, or there's some deed restriction that gets put in. We stay away from those. We want to be into a place where it becomes productive for everybody.
I love ideas like this, John, where you're especially changing the use of something. So, for example, short-term rentals is a perfect example of changing the use of a normal residential house, and therefore you create so much value. Taking a piece of land that has a duplex on it and rezoning it for a 10-unit or 15-unit. I love that. In California now, they're allowing people to build a 1 or 2 units basically in the backyard now to help solve some of the affordable housing problems. Well, that's a change of use. And I love stuff like that. It's and so Garrett and I and Drew were constantly looking for how can we improve the value of the buildings that we buy, and right above and beyond the traditional approach of going in there and making some renovations and raising the rents. Everybody's doing that, but what else can we do? I mean, we've looked at stuff like solar panels, selling electricity back, or billboards, digital billboards, or valet trash, or whatever, selling back whatever, like something that gives us an edge, because even $25 more in income makes a material difference. Therefore, we can be more competitive and buy more stuff. And that's very powerful. So you have done a bunch of stuff around making properties more eco-friendly or sustainable or energy efficient. And we've played with that as well. One of our favorite value add is doing water conservation. In fact, we build it in every one of our deals now. I mean, it's expensive, $50,000, $70,000. Someone comes in and replaces all the toilets and the flushing and the, and all of a sudden, but we save like 70% of the value on water, and we get that back, and it's a meaningful value add. And so what kind of stuff have you done or seen work that we can talk about here today?
Sure. I mean, you guys are on it. It falls under the umbrella of asset management. And it's funny, it seems like the most times we're all so busy that it's hard to really stare at your particular assets and figure, what is it that I can do to make this better? And it becomes a unique task through recessions, because as you guys know, when you go through those, you end up sitting around a lot. And you have to take the assets that you have and make them better, because that's how one of the tools in your box to survive those. And yeah, I mean, the water, it's interesting when you think about how people pro forma apartment acquisitions, right? And they'll sit down and and you get handed what I'll call the funny papers. And each year there's a adjustment of 2% for, let's say, income and 2% for expense. Right. And if you want to end up in a world, picture 10 years from now, look at what we're already seeing publicized problems of water shortages. Right. You guys are so smart to move into that space, because we could all end up with public water bills that we've never seen before in certain municipalities 3, 5, 6 years out that nobody has scheduled at all. So the more you can do in that kind of stuff is great. On to the renewable energy part that you asked me about. So when you look at things like your tenant base, right, and you say, well, what is the ideal tenant? And so for me, the ideal tenant is reliable with payment, low maintenance, quiet, and signs a long-term lease. Right. So if we were to partner, let's say, with a solar developer on one of our buildings, and the solar developer comes in and puts on our rooftop solar panels, and we lease the space to them, we now have another revenue stream that we can generate as a property owner. And all we did is lease out more space, and solar is the tenant.
That's cool. I like that, because we did look into solar, but it's very complex, but as becoming the operator, right? You got to install it, you got to then you got to somehow sell it back. But what you're talking about is leasing the roof to a solar provider. I love that.
And then, as you just mentioned, you have certain properties that you'll look at for expansion. So based on zoning entitlements, can we add development right units to our property and enhance its value? And if so, what's that going to cost? Well, what if we lease the ground around certain parts of our open space or our residual land to a solar developer who will put on the ground solar and interconnect to the grid. What if we do that? So those are options. And a lot of times we end up in properties where we have, let's say, environmental or wetland issues with setback, and we have to build, especially in the Northeast, you're 75, 100 feet away from any kind of wetland impact review areas. But with solar, you might be able to get closer. What if you can get within 50 feet? Because your impacts are not the same as a building. And all of a sudden, you can start to cash flow this residual dead land. And we hadn't all thought of that until recently. Now we have more incentives. So depending upon where you are, and if you're in the Northeast, where I can speak to, the states are pretty good about giving us incentives. And a blanket term for them are RECs, they're renewable energy credits. And what happens is if we or the developer hooks up to the grid and supplies power, either to our building and sells the residual back to the grid, or just sells to the grid, they can apply for and often get renewable energy credits in the form of kilowatt payment. So let's just say your tenants are used to paying 6 cents a kilowatt, 7 cents a kilowatt for power. And the energy providers in the state say that they'll pay, the public utility will pay for us to convert to more green energy. They might pay us 5 cents just for that. Now we can turn around and we can, on our residual land, create power for our tenants. And if we can create enough, we might be able to net meter, meaning sell the power on site to our tenants for 4 cents a kilowatt instead of the 6 that they're used to paying. I haven't met a tenant yet who wouldn't want to save on the power bill that way. And we're also getting paid 5 cents ourselves. So sometimes you can look at it as the developer and say, and it's complicated, you're right, but is it something that I can do? And if I want to partner with the developer, I'll just lease the land. Or is it something that we can say, okay, let's take a run at construction. And what does that mean? We're going to get a renewable energy credit through some form of a government program. And we're going to be able to charge our tenants some number for power. And we become the ultimate green developer. So picture that ribbon cutting ceremony. And I haven't met a public official yet that doesn't want to be at those in towns, because you're creating a nice green environment, which is all of the initiatives that you hear in the press today.
The problem with that is it is very complicated to navigate some of those things, which is why, for example, with the water conversation, there's a company that we hire that does everything for us. We just have to pay them and they do it, right? So is there something similar on the, for example, we're talking about solar now specifically, are there providers or consultants or developers that basically provide turnkey solutions to landowners or property owners?
Oh, sure. There should be one in every state. And in certain states, there's going to be multiple ones. That is a simple Google search of your locality to see who's there. Energy consultant, solar installation. Some companies want to just install on the rooftop and want to try to, the stuff I try to stay away from is the companies that want to put on either the single family or the multifamily rooftops, the solar, not charge, reduce the power bill perhaps for the tenants, and then have some form of an agreement where they get paid upon sale, or there's some deed restriction that gets put in. We stay away from those. We want to be into a place where it becomes productive for everybody. So if you're the operator, you're either leasing land or you're leasing the rooftop, which is always easier than trying to be the constructor and the operator, right? Or you partner with that constructor operator. And a lot of times when you're looking at land and you're looking at apartment buildings, not necessarily in the cities, but you get out in the suburbs, you have that residual land, the solar developers are happy for you to call. And you call one today and say, hey, I've got 200 to 400 kilowatts that I can put on the ground on 2 acres. They'll be at your door in 10 minutes, because that's typically not what they're good at, right? We're the developers. We're good at finding the land, maybe putting up the buildings, certainly operating them. What they're good at is the solar piece, but that missing link can often be de-risking the land for their installation.
Yeah. So we this is actually, I've seen kind of a common theme. So we've always kind of explored ways to add revenues, reduce expenses across our sites. And so one recent thing that we figured out was we found someone with like political ties into our market, and they put a billboard up, and we lease them the land, and then they construct the billboard. They cover all the costs. We sign like a 20-year lease, and then they're able to run their ads. And so there's a certain breaking point on like where it becomes profitable for the operator. And I'm just curious, with your setup, are these long-term contracts? Is it a similar setup with what you guys are doing? And at what point does it become profitable for you guys?
Yeah. So you're always trying to look at if we were going to be the installer on the rooftop, if we were going to do it, we're going to look first today at where we are. So each state is different. So you do need to you would need to know what state you're in for what renewable energy credits the states give. So in the Northeast, they give a lot. California, they give a lot. It's not necessarily that way everywhere. So you do need to know where you are with what you can get. But the federal tax credit is in fact that investment tax credit is anywhere between 26 and 30% for a solar installation today. So for us with a portfolio, if we were going to put $100,000 worth of solar on our rooftop, we're going to get a tax credit of $26,000 to $30,000 on that. If we're making money somewhere, that's obviously very good for us. If we're not, we can always sell that tax credit for, pick a number in the secondary market, 81, 82 cents to a company that is, and then we just get free cash to go out and buy another property, which is always interesting, depending upon how big that actual tax credit is. A lot of times, if we're going to finance that, the financier, the bank, is going to say, hey, roll that tax credit in. That's your equity down payment, which is fine. They always like those. But tax credit is a big one. So that's going to reduce the cost of our install. And then we can determine what are we doing with the power. If we're selling it to our tenants at a reduction, we certainly want a 5-year or sooner payback. So we're going to figure out how many meters we're going to be able to get. Our tenants sign up for it. And now we're going to sell them power at, pick a number, 10 cents, 8 cents, wherever we are, depending upon in the country, is different numbers. Northeast, very high. You're in the teens for a kilowatt power. So we can accelerate the payback here versus if we're somewhere else, maybe we can't. So you do have to know where you are with that. But I like that 5-6 year payback. Tends to be where most finance sources sit too, as far as if you're going to be able to finance it with a traditional lender. And then certain states have renewable energy lenders, green banks, those kind of things that might give you can certainly stare at the government for some of it. You might get some concessions in that space, but for me, it's got to be a 5 or 6 year payback, or it's just not worth doing.